Okay, you're all walking down a hallway, and at the end, you see a door. I go up to the door, and I open it.
I'm gonna stay to the back with an arrow ready.
The door opens to a room.
Ooh, a room. A room, you say? Any descriptive text for this room? Would you care to describe it to us?
Well, I mean, it's just, a square room, and, there are some werewolves in it.
Oh, werewolf den! I kill them all.
Now wait just a second. That seems a little suspicious. A simple square room with werewolves in it? Yeah, that seems really suspicious. Like, why is there nothing in that room? And why is it square?
Yeah, no kidding. Every room in this dungeon so far has been square. I bet there's a deeper meaning to this.
Indeed. And have you noticed that every room is connected to the next by a simple, straight hallway? There's definitely something at work behind the scenes that we're not aware of. I would like to cast Detect Magic to see if there's any spells affecting this dungeon.
No, your Detect Magic doesn't find anything. There's nothing abnormal about this dungeon. Now, what about those werewolves?
Well, I already killed the werewolves. Weren't you listening?
Yeah, those dead werewolves are the least of our problems.
I think we should retreat from this dungeon right away. Something's just not right.
I concur. And as we retreat, I'd like to cast Fire.
No, you're not casting any more spells. Look, you guys, there's nothing weird about this dungeon. It's just a normal dungeon.
Well, then why are all the rooms and hallways the same?
Because I'm not very good at designing dungeon maps, okay?
Okay, yeah, but then why have all of your descriptions been really bad too?
Yeah, they've been quite pathetic.
I'm also not very good at describing things. Words are hard.
Holy crap! Why didn't you say so?
Don't you know there are online resources for things like that?
Indeed, you could go to describe.com/the DM Lair for all of your narrative description needs. Yeah, and you can watch the video after this skit to learn how to design a better dungeon map too.
Awesome! Soon I'll be on a path to becoming a better dungeon master.
And a long path that will be.
Welcome to the DM Lair. I'm Lucar, and I've been a dungeon master since high school. On this channel, I give practical dungeon master advice that you can use in your Dungeons & Dragons games. Today in the Lair, we'll be discussing how to design a dungeon map. You know, that thing most dungeon masters draw out on grid paper to represent the location where an adventure takes place. Creating a good dungeon map isn't as easy as drawing a bunch of rooms and connecting them with hallways. It isn't terribly complicated though either, so no need to go off in the corner and cry on me either. So bear with me as I give you 10 guidelines for creating awesome dungeon maps that your players will love. This is clearly not 10. But before we jump in, let me ask you a question. Would you like to deliver amazing narrative descriptions to your players? Descriptions of places, monsters, spells, and other important elements of an epic fantasy adventure? Well, with Describe, you can enter the name of a monster, place, or spell and get a professionally written narrative description you can read to your players. For instance, let's say that you're running an encounter against an ancient red dragon, but you're not really sure how to describe it. Well, you can head on over to describe.com and type in dragon. And then you can see here you get a massive list of results. There are descriptions for dragon towns, dragon lairs, the different types and ages of dragons, and then of course you finally find what you're looking for, ancient red dragon. You click that and you get a beautiful description created by Describe's experienced RPG writers that you can read to your players. This helps you set that scene perfectly and paint that awesome description of a ferocious ancient red dragon. There are currently over 1,600 scenes of monsters, places, spells, characters, and items to help you describe that perfect scene to your players. And 𝐑𝐄𝐒 just recently released a cartographer's collection. Now, many of the scenes are completely free, but hundreds more are available with a paid subscription. So if you want to enhance the theater of mind experience for your players in your next game session, check out 𝐑𝐄𝐒 at dscryb.com/thedmlair. And the first 50 people that use the coupon code @thedmlair will get $7 off a subscription. Okay, and now let's get onto it, creating an awesome dungeon map. Number 1, multiple entrances. All right, so you're designing a dungeon map, designing a dungeon. The first thing here is that you want to have more than one entrance. You want there to be an obvious option, the front doors, a second option if the group tries to find one, and maybe even a third option. For instance, in my Against the Fire Giants remake, because I didn't really like the module itself and I kind of redid a lot of it because in my remake of it, there were 2 options to get into the fire giant compound. There was the front gate that was manned by fire giants. There was this massive wall. There were fire giants and turrets that spat out fire. It was this big ordeal if you wanted to go in through the front gates. Or you could go up to the top of the volcano and go in through the mouth of the volcano down into the fire giant compound. So, also another option. It wasn't completely unguarded, but it sure seemed a whole lot easier than the front door. Options are always good in adventures, not just in what the characters can do, but how they can enter and approach the dungeon. So incorporate that into your dungeon map. And as in my fire giant example, different entrances should have pros and cons of using them. So if they had done the frontal assault option, it would have been very difficult, but it would have taken care of those enemies there, preventing them from possibly coming in and having to fight them later. And sneaking through the volcano entrance at the top was easier, even though it was guarded, but it didn't eliminate the fire giants at the entrance, who could then later maybe become a problem. So, pros and cons. Let your players weigh them and then decide. Number 2, non-linear maps with loops. All right, okay. Dungeons that only have one path forward are boring, and they take away player choice, and they feel railroady. It's like, okay guys, there's only one way you can go. Just keep going straight. Oh, fight some stuff. Go this way. Go fight some stuff. Oh, go this way. No. We want some options. We want loops. We want the dungeon map to be non-linear. For instance, if we look at the map from level 17 of the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, there are multiple loops and paths the players could take. And this makes things far more interesting for them and feels less like the Dungeon Master is just shoving them down the only way they can go. Now I will say this, non-linear maps with loops do make the dungeon harder for the Dungeon Master to run, because you can't anticipate the direction the players are going to go. And if you're running a large dungeon, like one of these layers, these levels of Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which are immense, then you kind of got to prepare everything because you don't know which way they're going to go. Even though a level of the dungeon that big could easily take several game sessions to get through. However, it is a far more enjoyable and fun game experience for the players, so in my opinion, it's worth it. Number 3, elevation and different levels. And by different levels, I mean just use all 3 dimensions. Don't just have everything be flat and 2-dimensional. Have there be ledges, have there be stairs that lead up to an elevated portion of the room or something like that. Have there be a balcony up here that overlooks an area down below. The thing is that flat is boring. And when you use elevations, it makes your map more interesting, and it gives your players options for if combat happens to break out. Because you know you might want to go up those stairs and get on the elevated area to give you a better vantage, better shots with your bow, or something like that. For instance, for level 17 of Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I'm going to be mentioning this module a lot in this video because it's got some really good maps. Look at Area 8A, where there is a cliff, or Area 3, where there is a ravine. And then around Area 12, there is an underground channel of water. Or if we pop on over to the Werewolf Den map from Curse of Strahd, there are various elevations in that cave system. For instance, you can see stairs that lead up and down to the different areas, and there are ledges and elevations where the players might explore or fight from. Elevations add realism, and it gives players choices. They can can take the stairs or climb down that ledge. They can also push that bad guy down that ravine. And of course, we're talking about levels and elevations, so might as well talk about multi-level dungeons too. These could be your traditional underground dungeons, where stairs lead down to lower and lower levels, and traditionally the lower you go, the more dangerous things get, and the more loot too. Or you could have something like a castle with multiple levels. And you know, keep things interesting, you can have things connected by stairs, but there could also be vertical chutes or elevators even. Magical elevators or something, I guess. Number 4, secret areas. Yeah, nothing like a secret area to make things a little spicy. Because put some cool crap in there and players may or may not even find them, but hey, they're good. Basically just include secret rooms and corridors. It gives players a reward for exploring and poking around and all that good stuff. And obviously you can stash cool stuff away in those secret areas so that if they find the secret room or the secret corridor, there might be something cool in there, or something like a secret corridor might help them bypass part of the dungeon and not have to fight a bunch of bad guys. It doesn't have to just be secret doors though. Look at level 17 of the map of Dungeon of the Mad Mage again. Around area 12, there are underground channels of water accessible by pools of water in certain chambers. Those are also secret areas. And make sure when you write out your adventure, you include clues that hint at those secret areas being there. Not crazy clues that make it obvious, just a little something every here and there. For instance, you might have a current in the pool, current in that water that hints that it isn't fully enclosed. Or if you're standing next to a wall where there's a secret door, there might be a draft that you can feel. And the option exists to give no hints whatsoever and just expect your players to look around and do their due diligence. There's nothing wrong with that either. Just do what you want to do, I guess. Number 5, variety. And by variety, I'm talking about the room types and the purpose of the rooms. In other words, when you're designing a dungeon, the rooms have different purposes. They aren't all just big, square, empty rooms with nothing in them. Like, there should be barracks, there might be a kitchen, there might be a pantry, there could be a practice yard where you're training, there might be a shrine. You know, all of those different types of things could be purposes of rooms that are in your dungeon. And I find that the random chamber purposes tables in the Dungeon Master Guide starting on page 292 are super helpful for determining what different types of rooms you might have in your dungeon. And also, room and corridor shapes are important too. Not everything should have the same design and the same shape. Not like all square rooms or all circular rooms. Have things vary and be interesting and dynamic for your players. For instance, let's take a look at level 17 of Dungeon of the Mad Mage. You can see natural cave formations in certain parts of this map, and you could also see worked rooms that are square, circular, half moon, curved. There's tons of variety here. All right, and then variety. Dungeon features. Not everything in the dungeon should be the same. So we should have natural areas of unworked caverns, or we could have worked areas where dwarves or somebody has clearly made this into nice straight lines or circles or something like that. And we can have dry areas and wet areas. We can have tall ceilings, low ceilings, wide corridors, narrow corridors. Variety is the name of the game here. When it makes sense. Do I need to show you a map of level 17 of Dungeon of the Mad Mage again? Number 6, tactically useful and interesting areas for combats. D&D is a game with combat, usually, so consider that when building dungeons. Include cool places where combats can take place. A narrow ledge with lava down below, the battlements of a castle with a drop into a moat full of spikes. You can have choke points that the enemy uses to their advantage in combat and that can also be reversed on them and the players could use it. You might have terrain created intentionally by the enemy to aid them in battles. For instance, a tall balcony that the spellcaster casts spells from. It's hard to reach them, and there's a low wall that the spellcaster could duck behind. Speaking of low walls, how about a low wall for archers? They fire and then pop down below the wall so they can't be fired upon themselves. Number 7, natural features when appropriate. I love things, especially in places you wouldn't expect them, like underground dungeons, caverns, and things like that, where you'll find a river with a bridge built over it, or channels of magma, ravines, cliffs, stalagmites, stalactites. All of these sorts of natural features add variety and make your dungeon way more interesting than if we just got your rooms and corridors again. Number 8, doors. Yeah, I know, you're like, Luke, really? Really? Well, did you just need another point for your video? Doors. Okay, put doors in the dungeon. Luke's lost it. You think we're that dumb? Actually, I was that dumb on occasion. And let me tell you why doors is a point here. There was this one time that I designed a dungeon that had no doors. And my group was, I think they were about level 12 or so, and the wizard had arcane eye. And he had his little arcane eye pretty much go through most of the dungeon, scouting out the entire dungeon and seeing where all the enemies were and what was the fastest route to the bad guy. And that all happened in the space of maybe 15 minutes. They'd scouted out the entire dungeon, knew the layout, knew everything was. And some people are gonna be like, well, Luke, what, you're trying to squash that? That's creative and ingenuity. We should let players do that sort of thing. That's wonderful. That's not the point. The problem is that it ruins the mystery for all of the players at the table. It ruins the element of exploration that some of the players enjoy doing. When you know everything that's in the dungeon and where all the bad guys are within 15 minutes, a lot of the excitement and anticipation and drama is gone at that point. You might as well have just read the module and then played it through. It's not that I'm trying to squash players who are using their spells and doing cool stuff. It's more that I'm trying to prevent the game from being ruined for other players who want to be able to explore and discover and find things, as opposed to just having it handed to them in 15 minutes. There you go. That was the adventure that I learned that you need doors. And doors play lots of important roles in dungeons as well. First of all, they restrict line of sight, so you can't just have, wizards or enemy wizards just pinging people from like 300 feet away down a corridor or something. They also conceal what's in the next room, so that you have to open the door to see what's inside. And that could be a scary thing when you don't know what's behind that door. And you're low on resources and you really don't want to fight something, and you open the door and boom, there's a bad guy. And then everybody's on edge and you're like, oh crap, what do we do? How do we handle the situation? And you can also have locks and traps on doors, making them interesting elements for the game. Bottom line is that doors do a whole lot of good things for your dungeons, so don't neglect them. Number 9, scale. This is basically the question of whether it's 5 feet squares or 10 feet squares. Not that big of a deal, but it could be an important decision when you're drawing out your dungeon map. The thing is that I have found that when I make my dungeon maps on grid paper, usually, or it could be virtual tabletops, but let's just say grid paper for my own personal purposes, I have found that making 10 feet squares are easy for reference when running the game, and drawing the game out or drawing the dungeon map out on grid paper for my players, assuming we're playing in person. However, I have found that 5 feet squares are far better for virtual tabletop use. Just ask me about the time or two that we're running Curse of Strahd, and the people there decided to have 10-foot squares or 20-foot squares for their virtual tabletop maps. It was miserable. It was a horrible, crappy way to do a virtual tabletop map. So the people who converted those maps for Roll20 for Curse of Strahd should be ashamed of themselves for screwing that up royally. Should have converted those to 5-foot squares. Hardcore. Basically, my rule of thumb is if I have a very large map of a very large area, I'm going to use 10-foot squares. And if it's a smaller map, 5-foot squares. And if I'm doing a map specifically for virtual tabletop, it's going to be 5-foot squares every single time. Number 10. Look at other maps to get inspiration before you draw your own. This is just like a pro tip for you. It's not actually a thing, but you should do it because it's very helpful. Because the thing is that creating a map from nothing, you have no ideas at all, you have no other map to reference. You might have something in here going on, but nothing to reference. It can be a daunting thing. So if you do a Google search for D&D maps and look at examples, you get your juices flowing, you get some ideas, you see some cool things that other people did, and then you can take all of these different ideas and you can mesh them together into your own awesome dungeon map. Remember, if you're looking for professionally written box text that you can use with your RPG group, check out dscribe.com at the link below. Dscribe will help you set that scene beautifully for your players, taking your game to the next level. So stop fumbling over your words like our beloved avid barbarian and check out what Describe can do for your D&D game today. And if you think barbecue ribs are delicious, give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment for the algorithm down below. Let YouTube know how succulent and juicy barbecue ribs can really be. And until next time, let's play D&D and eat those barbecue ribs.